Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Henkel. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at pflagnation.al. Just like every Thursday, we are coming together to have a conversation about something happening in the LGBTQ space. And again, just like every week, we're going to introduce and bring in Jean Marie DiBenedetto to lead today's conversation.
Jamie Henkel, how are you?
Jean Marie.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I was looking out my window just a second ago and being really proud of how well my garden is doing and finally starting to blossom and bloom with nice weather here.
See, the nice weather can only mean one thing, and that is that Pride Month is right around the corner.
That's true. That's true. All right, well, you have fun. And
everything blooms, and we're going to have a good time today.
Cool.
Thanks, Jamie. Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National, and my pronouns are she and her if you use Spanish, ella. Every single week, as Jamie said, we get to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion. And today we are talking about one of my very favorite topics in the entire world, which is LGBTQ history. So for those of you who have joined us before, we always share an article to get you thinking about the topic. This week's article was written by Chase DiBenedetto in Mashable, and it was entitled, "Want to know more about LGBTQ history? Follow these accounts." And it's a handful of LGBTQ history sites and social feeds that really will help you get caught up and learn the things that you probably did not learn in school. And today we have one of my very favorite LGBTQ historians coming on, Dr. Eric Cervini. So let me tell you a little bit about Eric before we bring him in. His first book, The Deviance War, The Homosexual versus the United States of America, which was largely about Frank Kameny, was a New York Times bestseller and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And I'm telling you, totally worth reading. If you haven't read it, you need to get your copy. He is also the creator and the executive producer of The Book of Queer, a comedic and music-filled docuseries about queer history, which is about to premiere on Discovery Plus. So get your subscriptions in order, everybody. And you can definitely learn more about him at ericcervini.com. And with that, I would like to introduce Eric Cervini.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for having me.
I am so happy that you're here and always excited to talk about history with you. And I think with your show coming up, we probably have a ton of things to talk about.
Oh my gosh. That was the hardest part, honestly. The entire show was just picking. We could only tell 15 stories. So how do you pick from the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands, millions of stories out there?
How do you pick
15? It's impossible.
It's a quality problem. Well, I can only hope that there'll be series after series after season. I know. So we'll get everybody to watch. So I want to talk a little bit about what got you into LGBTQ history first. I want to talk a little bit about your book, and then I definitely want to talk about the show and what people can expect, because I am personally very excited about it. So what exactly got you into LGBTQ history? We spend so much time talking about what's not taught. What was sort of the trigger that got you to this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I am originally from right outside of Austin, Texas, a town called Round Rock, and had a great education, great schools, great public schools, and thought I had a pretty good understanding of American history. And I was in the closet all through high school and didn't come out until college. And around that time, right after, I happened to watch the film Milk about Harvey Milk, written by Dustin Lance Black, phenomenal. And I realized, wait a second, how was I not taught about this story? How did I not learn about Harvey Milk and his accomplishments, let alone his tragic end? And then the next question was, what other stories are out there that I also haven't learned about, or stories that no one has even written about yet? And one of the first names that I stumbled upon after that, I was 19 years old or so, was Frank Kameny. And he had just passed away a couple years before. Some historians had written a little bit, some references or chapters about him and regarded him as the grandfather of the gay rights movement, but there was not a full book about him. And so fast forward 8 years, now we have a book. And I hope it gave him his due. I think he deserves a few more books about his life and so many of the other folks who influenced him and whom he influenced. So hopefully it's just the first of many.
I have to tell you, I loved the book so much. I actually had the opportunity to meet Frank Kameny once. He was sitting behind me in a conference, and I heard kind of this running commentary about what was being said by the speaker. And I turned around to see who this kind of cranky person was, and it sure was Frank Kameny correcting the record of the speaker. It was an experience, I'll say that. But I thought I knew his story, and then I read your book, and I thought I missed everything. I just missed everything. So sort of talking broadly about LGBTQ history, as you started to get in it, were there any big surprises as you started to do this dive, starting with Harvey Milk, then going into Frank Kameny? Were there any moments where you found either really angry that you hadn't been taught this or really surprised that some of this wasn't around for you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that surprised me most was looking at the connections between movements. So, I started researching Frank Kameny and why was it that he decided to organize the first demonstration outside of the White House for gay rights in 1965, right? That's 4 years before Stonewall. And so what spurred this? I was trying to answer these questions, and then you realize how did he get this idea? Well, just a few months before that, about 2 years, he attended the March on Washington in 1963, organized by a gay Black man named Bayard Rustin, another figure who also deserves. He has a few
much more than what he's gotten. Yeah.
Yes, much more. There is actually, the
Brother
screenwriter
Outsider.
What's that?
Oh, Brother Outsider, the documentary.
Brother Outsider is phenomenal, but you know what? The Obamas are producing a film about him.
I didn't know.
And it's with the director of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and the writer of Milk. So it's going to be very, very good. Yeah. So keep an eye out. I'm not sure if they're done filming yet, and hopefully I'm allowed to talk about it. I think I can. It's been announced.
Now we did.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, yeah. So looking at how these two movements are related, and really, I always say Frank Kameny's chief accomplishment was serving as a Xerox machine and copying step by step what the Black Freedom Movement had already accomplished and learning from it and then implementing it, whether it was in front of the White House and picketing, whether it was through lawsuits, copying, the NAACP, or eventually with the rise of Black Power, Black is beautiful became gay is good. Right. And so every single step of the way, and especially, it's about to be Pride Month. I also like to say every element of Pride, whether it's that first march that we now continue celebrating every single June, or, the concept of Pride itself. We borrowed that from the Black Freedom Movement. So I think that was one of the things that surprised me. Not that it happened, because it makes sense, right?
Right.
But what surprised me was more that people weren't talking about it and not saying, okay, if we were borrowing all of these strategies from another movement, doesn't that mean we have a moral and political obligation to work together, to return the favor, if you will?
Yeah, I love the way that you put that. And I think there needs to be an intentionality in the way that you look at some of this history so you can suddenly see those connections. Because once you see them, they pop up everywhere. One of the things I think I found most fascinating about your book was that it was so much pre-Stonewall history. And I feel like, unfortunately, especially here in the US, although certainly we hear it everywhere, it feels like life begins at Stonewall. And in fact, life did not begin at Stonewall. There was so much that happened prior to that. I think about Susan Stryker's work with Compton's Cafeteria, which was nearly lost. And so much when we compare Stonewall and what happened there, it was so similar, and yet no one was taught about it. One of the things I sort of found really interesting was I think many histories of Frank Kameny had written him up as this right out of the closet activist, somebody who was just fire in his belly the whole time. What I learned in your book is it was kind of a long trip towards his activism.
Yeah.
Did he seem a little bit like a reluctant activist in the beginning to you? Or am I reading that correctly?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, looking at even from the age of 6 years old, he had no interest in being an activist of any kind, let alone a gay activist. He was politically inclined. He would show up at civil rights meetings and things like that. But above all else, all he wanted his entire life, even through his activism, was to be an astrophysicist, right? To study space, to help humankind reach the stars. And this was in 1957. This was a couple years before NASA was even founded. And so he really was, with Harvard PhD, he was an Army veteran. He already had incredible amount of experience in astrophysics. He would have been one of the founding fathers of the American manned space program. But then, of course, the military, the Pentagon specifically, in the Army, told him that he couldn't because, and only because, he was gay. And as you saw in the book, he spent years and years and years fighting that. And it wasn't until he had no other choice and realized that he was up against anything but logic, right? Anything but fairness. He was up against prejudice. And in his mind, if he wasn't going to be an astrophysicist, he wasn't going to settle. And so he was going to keep fighting until he won. And ultimately he did.
It sort of amazes me when I think about different figures in history, and Frank Kameny is one of them. I also recently had a chance to go to Bletchley Park, and I was studying more about Alan Turing.
Wow.
And you look at these figures like Alan Turing, like Frank Kameny, who had skills that were so essential to what was happening in their respective countries at the time, and yet they were put into a corner, marginalized, and far worse than that, simply because of their identities. And it really is kind of a reminder of the power of homophobia and the power of hate, and how people will choose that even over their self-interest in many cases.
Right.
It's really frustrating to see. So as we look at what's happening now, the word unprecedented seems to be used a whole lot. We are looking at an unprecedented amount of an anti-LGBTQ legislation, an unprecedented number of book bannings, a lot of those having to do with LGBTQ characters and LGBTQ history. The American Library Association said they have recorded the most book bans in the history of the organization in the past year. And I think it was PEN America said there have been over 1,500 book bannings just in the last 6 months.
Wow, I had no idea. Wow.
It's really bad. So, but we keep seeing this word unprecedented popping up, that nothing like this has happened before. But as a historian, you're somebody who has paid attention to what has happened in the past. Opposition has always existed. As you look at what is happening around us right now, do you see something that is different than what has happened in the past? Or is this a lot of, unfortunately, history repeating itself?
Unfortunately, it's both in all the worst ways. In that, what's different is the visibility of it, right? It's not unprecedented in that this hasn't happened before. It's happened every single decade almost. There has been some sort of anti-LGBTQ plus panic going all the way back to the very beginning of the 20th century in America, of course, in other countries, all for centuries and centuries. But FDR, when he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, initiated the first anti-gay purge in Newport, Rhode Island, at a naval base there, and that was right after World War I. And then it kept going and going. You have J. Edgar Hoover initiating another sex panic in the 30s to try to consolidate his power. Of course, after World War II, you have the Lavender Scare, which is a big theme or context within my book, where if you're gay, then you're automatically a security risk. You're more likely to give your secrets. I'm so sorry for this dog. He is an absolute terror. And
this
we
proves
love him.
How live we are.
He just really he gets really amped up by queer history. He just gets so excited, and he has so much to contribute, and so I'm so sorry. Oh boy. Anyways, so as I was saying, all of these different panics of politicians, especially, very similar to now, using queer folks as a scapegoat, as a distraction, as a political tool to win political points, because it's much easier to say, oh, there's this threat from within. These queer folks are ruining or grooming, as we would say now, or others would say now, our children. What's different is now, simply because of technology, because of the internet, because of 24-hour news, it's everywhere, right? And we're seeing it all the time. And I think what is unprecedented is very often in the past, it was the media fueling the flames. And you're still seeing that with some networks and some commentators doing the same thing. But also the coordination among the different politicians is really pernicious. I think I've never seen this level of coordination really since maybe Anita Bryant in 1978, and even that was kind of just copycats trying to replicate her success. But right now you're seeing verbatim language in these bills popping up all across the entire country, and I think that I would guess is unprecedented, but I'm sure historians will be writing about this moment and studying it for a long time.
I have to admit, I frequently, as I see what's happening around us, wonder how history is going to write about what happened right now. It's fascinating and terrifying all at the same time. But I think you're right. The technology aspect of it, it has the power to do so much good, and it has the power to do such immediate destruction. It is stunning. So on a better note, because that's a little depressing, and I appreciated the dog interlude that broke it up for us, so I felt less daunted.
Intermission.
So you've been super busy working on the series for Discovery Plus. So tell me as much as you're able to tell us about it, because I'm
sure
excited to hear this.
They've done such a great job getting out all the news about it. They've released pretty much the entire lineup. And so it is essentially a queer history extravaganza. We're telling 15 stories ranging all the way from ancient Greece and ancient Egypt all the way up to Bayard Rustin and, ACT UP and the creation of the rainbow flag and so many different figures. It has the largest all queer and trans cast in the history of Hollywood. And every single episode ends with a choreographed musical number written and performed by a queer performer. So it's really an extravaganza. I can't think of another word.
No, that is the appropriate use of the word extravaganza.
Exactly. Right. And the coolest part for me, I'm biased, but the coolest part is that we brought in 18 historians to help tell these stories. So we have actors playing the parts and comedians who wrote the role. So it's very funny and light and joyful. But the historians are also on screen helping to tell the story. So we have folks like Susan Stryker talking about trans identity in the West in the 19th and 20th centuries, and so many incredible historians who shared their knowledge. And I'm just so excited for people to see it because it's been my my life for about 2 years now, and I'm just thrilled for folks to see it.
Well, I have to ask the question: how did you pick your 15 stories, knowing there are countless stories that we could be telling? I don't even know if I'd know where to start.
Thankfully, I wasn't on my own, and I'll be honest. A lot of it was people just telling us which story. We were like, here are 300 stories. What do you think? We kind of like these. Of course, we wanted to get diversity. We wanted to make sure we were getting the full spectrum of the LGBTQ plus experience. It's American produced, so it's mostly focused on America, but we travel a bit, right? We go to Egypt, we go to Mesopotamia and elsewhere, to India, and a lot of it is trying to use figures whom we may have heard about. Figures like you mentioned, Alan Turing. A lot of people saw the film about him, but queerness played a very, very small part in it. Even Harvey Milk, what can you get in an hour and a half, 2 hour film? There's always more to the story. And so a lot of the characters we highlight, like Eleanor Roosevelt or even Abraham Lincoln, and maybe they were queer, arguably. And so, there's of course historians debate, but I think folks will have to tune in to see what kind of evidence we have.
I'm so excited to see this. Especially, I have to admit, a few years ago I read the biography of Alexander Hamilton, and the way his potential queerness was handled in the book, that his letters, his writings were so meticulously preserved, and yet the letters to John Lawrence mysteriously disappeared. And it makes you wonder who was in charge of that history.
I know. And even the musical, amazing musical.
Yes.
But the whole time you're watching and you're like, all right,
you're super close.
More here. I think we could have played with this a little. We took a lot of creative liberties with that musical. We could have certainly taken some queer ones as well. So we're definitely trying to do that in the show.
I think it's kind of fun. And I know people say, well, we speculate everybody could be queer, but I'm like, yeah, everyone actually can be queer at some point. There's so many ways that you can look at it. So, we're PFLAG. In addition to hugging, which has been very difficult for us for the past few years, we try to give people something to do because we are all about activating our allies. And I find that whenever we do shows on history, whenever we do any of our history classes, people get really, really excited. Interestingly enough, we are seeing people get really excited, like you and I are talking about your show right now. And it is at a time where we are literally also seeing books about our community disappearing off library shelves at kind of an alarming rate. So I would love, from your perspective, what should our everyday activists be doing to make sure that these conversations about our history are still happening? The non-trained historian, what kind of advice do you have for them about making sure these stories stay alive and that they stay centered in an environment which is frankly threatening them?
I think there are so many activists, especially on social media, who are doing such incredible work that tell me what I should be doing. Because every week, sadly, because of just how quickly the other side is moving against us, there's a different action item every week. And I'm writing, I'm working on other projects, or I'm busy with the show, so I'm not able to very easily do the research myself. So a very easy way to be informed about how you can give back, or even just take small steps, or whom to contribute to, is follow some of these activists. So like Chase DiBenedetto at the ACLU often posts really, really good resources or action items for what we can do to help, especially this anti-trans legislation. Who else? Alok Vaidmenon is phenomenal and often posts incredible poetry, but also calls to action. I'm trying to think who else. Blair Amani is another wonderful queer, bisexual, Muslim activist online who provides many lessons also about how we can be a good ally, especially in an intersectional sense. So those are just a few of some of my favorites.
And I think you make a really good point. The way we keep these stories alive, the way we keep these issues centered, it literally is changing from week to week, sometimes from day to day. And I think it is so absolutely critical. I do need to ask you one question because we have the time for it, and I did not plan for this. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity. Everybody is talking about the Supreme Court leak about the Roe versus Wade decision. You are somebody who knows an inordinate amount about history in our community. Do you think that we are going to see more mobilization of queer people around issues of reproductive health? And do you see any sort of historic grounding for that work that you can point to?
I think any time that queer folks or any marginalized group can forge alliances with other marginalized groups, whether it's queer folks and women, queer white guys like me, and queer people of color, or even straight people of color. There's another great film called Pride. I don't know if you've seen it in Wales, where it's based on a true story. LGBT activists partnering with workers, right, with unionists. And what I think all these lessons teach us is, we're fighting the same forces of oppression, right? It's the same folks, the same Supreme Court justices who very much could overturn Lawrence next, right? Overturn the anti-sodomy ban from 2003. That's very much plausible. And I don't know if I would have said that a few months ago before this leak. I think that would have been incomprehensible. But given what we've seen, I think we have to be prepared for the worst. And I think the best way to combat that is for queer folks, especially those with privilege, especially those who have the funds, reach out to the queer women and non-binary folks in your life, or trans folks who are likely to be impacted by this ruling, and ask what we can do to help. What what marches can we show up to? What organizations can we be donating? And what that happens next is then inevitably when they try to come for us, right? When, if we have a new Congress and they try to pass anti-LGBT legislation at the federal level, we're going to be searching around saying, okay, who can help us? Who can be our allies now? And folks like those who are being affected by this court case or any other marginalized group, they'll remember, whether or not we helped or not. And so I really recommend that it's the perfect case study of how that works. And it's called Pride. And so
it's a great film, and it's such an interesting story that I think a lot of people don't realize, and what powerful partnership. But I think getting back to exactly where this conversation started, how amazing it is to find these models that have inspired activism in the past and realize they are giving us the roadmap that we potentially need to move forward. Exactly. It's kind of exciting, although a little bit intimidating. I can't lie about that.
It is, but you know what? If there's anything I've learned from, Jean Manford and PFLAG, it's that you can do the impossible, right? When you come together and there's these incredible organizations like y'all who are creating such incredible spaces and communities for parents and their loved ones. It's wonderful. So I think all we have to do, anyone listening, just look into the history of PFLAG, and that should be motivational enough.
And it's very exciting. We are about to hit our 50-year anniversary. So we have a whole lot of history to tell. And I know that we are putting together some pretty neat stuff, some found history on PFLAG that I have to admit is very exciting to see where it has plugged into the rest of the movement too. So very excited about that. So one last question for you, which is, are there any recommendations that you would make for people in terms of studying their LGBTQ history of famous figures of resistance that maybe you have been looking at lately that have given you a little bit of inspiration in these kind of rotten times? Any names of people who maybe don't come up a lot?
Ooh, well, I think one of the other names besides Bayard Rustin, who I think has provided a lot of emotional support for me through my life, is James Baldwin, the novelist and activist as well. Who put into words so much about our history and about activism and about fighting back in ways that I could never express, that I think most people could never. He's one of the most beautiful writers in all of humanity. And so I think, whether it's Giovanni's Room or The Fire Next Time or anyone who hasn't had contact with his work or who has but wants to read more, I think that gives so much, especially when we're searching for purpose and for comfort in a really scary time. He was writing in a really scary time as well, right? In the 50s and 60s and beyond. That was a really dark time to be a gay Black man, period. And so I think there's so much we can learn from him. And a lot of what I try to do is just trying to learn from these folks, right? Because we stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, so many folks, whether it's Frank Kameny or Rustin or Baldwin, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, anytime we're feeling overwhelmed, you just look at how they did it. And it's remarkable what they were able to overcome.
Thank you for saying all those names, and especially thank you for elevating James Baldwin. I feel like people started looking at him a little bit more as they were talking about Black Lives Matter, but I feel like his name has faded a little bit again.
Yeah.
And I think pick up any of his books. It could be written today. And I think that there's no time. You don't even feel that there has been time between him and where we are right now. Eric, we are out of time. We've got to start wrapping up. It is always so good to have you here. I am so excited about your program. Everybody needs to make sure they're getting their Discovery Plus lined up so that way you can watch it. Please come back and visit us again and tell us more about what you're doing, because you are a gift to this movement. You really are.
Oh my gosh. Likewise. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor.
Thanks a lot, Eric. We'll see you soon. Well, everybody, we need to wrap up. That was such a fun conversation. I have the best job in the whole world because we're always talking about books. Just as a reminder, if you want to lead with love, you should read with love. So check out PFLAG's bookshelf at pflag.org/readwithlove to learn how you can replenish some of those things that are starting to disappear off library shelves. And my book that I would recommend this week is, if you have not read The Deviance War, this is the book that you definitely want to pick up and start reading. We will be back next week with another fantastic show. And until then, we wrap up the same way every single week, reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. If you need any help between now and next week, visit us at pflag.org and we will be ready to help you. Have a good week, everyone.